Hello and good afternoon to another edition of Adapt2Changes, the series that talks a little bit about how people and professionals adapt in their careers when changes occur, whether they've initiated the change or whether the change has happened to them. Today, I'm really happy to be joined by my longtime friend, Craig Savage. Hello, Craig. How are you?
Hey, Brett. How's it going?
Doing well, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you. I really appreciate you taking the time, to discuss how, you've done well in your career, by adapting to changes successfully. So in thinking about that, can you talk a little bit about how your career has evolved since you graduated college, and where did it take you in places that you maybe were surprised about and dealt with some of those initial changes that occurred?
Sure. Well, as you know, I graduated business school in 1998 and started my career at Goldman Sachs, really catering to high net worth individuals in terms of being their asset manager, financial advisor. And if you roll back, if you rewind 22 years, I mean, this was pre iPhone, pre BlackBerry. The technology we have today is vastly different than the technology we had back then. And literally, I mean, the younger people who would ever be listening to this don't remember those pink little while you were gone notes, and your assistant would write, "Oh, call back Bret Rachlin. He called Thursday at 5 if you're on a business trip." And that's how my career got started. And if you think about that, and it was in the middle of the dot-com bubble. And prior to the dot-com bubble, we had a lot of financial scandal with Enron, WorldCom. And then we had, because of that, we had a lot of financial regulation. So not only did technology change, but the compliance in my industry dramatically changed. You remember 9/11, a guy tries to blow up a plane by lighting his shoe. And now we all have to take our shoes off, right? Because of that. In my industry, because of the Enrons, the WorldComs, and those types of bad actors, it's amazing what we're still doing 20 years later in terms of compliance and the things that have happened since the financial crisis, for example. So, I think about what's the main thing that has changed in my job. It's definitely compliance, regulation, and then technology, communication with our clients, but also how we're communicating within teams and the expectation of that now.
Right.
And how we evolved. And I've seen people in my industry who are older than I am, who I was created a saying, if you don't evolve, you will dissolve. And, but I am a change agent. I love change. I embrace it. I'm the first mover advantage. I mean, I was the first one to ever buy a Tesla that I had all my friends in the family. I like to try new things, and I push my team that way as well. But it's not everybody is like me.
So that's a good point. So how do you feel you got comfortable? Is that something you've always had, that you've been comfortable with, like, kind of taking the leading effort to try something new? Or is that something that you recognized, maybe especially with technology, that you had a first mover advantage if you got out in front? Like, is that something you were born with, or do you think you developed that skill?
That's a great question. I'm not quite sure, because I've managed a lot of people and I've recruited and trained a lot of people, and I look for that skill because I look for people that are comfortable being uncomfortable, right? I like to see how large people's comfort zones are. And to expand your comfort zone, if you think about it, by definition, you have to be uncomfortable sometimes. So I just look for people that are not afraid to try new things. Have they traveled? That's a good indicator to me. Do they like to travel internationally? Do they try new foods? Do they, what experiences do they have on their resume outside of school? If they do have undergraduate and grad, is it geographically diverse? Did they try someplace new in the country? One story I love to tell is, this was an unbelievable candidate I interviewed in 2008 during the financial crisis. I'll never forget this. There was a young man, he had an unbelievable resume. I was head of recruiting and training at Goldman Sachs, and they brought me in to close him. And I went in, I'm like, wow, they sent me in early. You must be a phenomenal candidate. And on his resume, he grew up in Westchester. He went to Columbia undergrad, and he went to Columbia Business School. And this is between his first and second year of business school. And I said, okay, I'm going to send you anywhere in the world you want to go for the summer. He goes, I want to stay here in New York.
Wow.
And I'm like, whoa. I can send you to Singapore. I'm going to bring you back. I kind of told him, I go, don't worry, I'm going to bring you back. But you're that strong of a candidate. I'll send you to Singapore. I'll send you to Hong Kong. I'll send you to San Francisco, London. Where do you want to go? New York. And I'm like, then I started asking him about traveling and everything like that. And I said, I'm going to ask you this question one more time. Where do you want to go? And he said, New York. And I ultimately didn't give him the job because in our job, our job, we're constantly learning new things. Products are always changing. Financial instruments, markets are changing.
Right.
And he just came to me. He was a great candidate on paper, but I walked out of the room and I told everybody I didn't hire him. Actually declined him. And everybody was shocked. And I told them why. I go, because as a young person, Britt, if somebody gave us that opportunity to go any place for 10 weeks, we'd be like,
absolutely.
So, but anyway, I think I don't know if you're born with it or not. It's a good question.
Well, what you're talking about, I've contended that having an open mind is critical to being able to adapt to changes. Because it, to your point about being comfortable with what's uncomfortable, having that open mind really helps you recognize that things are going to change and this is a new experience and it can be positive. But it's that natural curiosity that I think has certainly helped me, adapt to changes through my career and other parts of my life. And so my question really around being open-minded, do you think that, because one of the things that people talk about in terms of success is having a routine. Okay. And in fact, I was just reading an article today from an executive coach who deals with leadership training for, Fortune 500 companies. And she was talking about how you can really survive the pandemic and all the changes that have gone on, and especially caring for your team. But one of the things she was talking about was having a routine to be able to get through that. And it was very much about self-care, which overall I completely agree with. The challenge with the routine is that it puts you in a place where if that routine gets disrupted, that can really disrupt your life. If you're not, so my question really is do you think can you practice being open-minded? Can you do things to make sure that you are practicing being uncomfortable at times? Because we get into our careers, 20 years in, 25 years in, and we've been doing these things a long time. We get used to a certain way. And then all of a sudden, if we're not practicing that natural curiosity, we could be in real trouble if some, unprecedented change happens.
I do think it needs to be practiced because I'm of the mindset, if it's not broken, break it, because that's the only way you're going to grow. And so what I do in my team is, and I got people at different levels, but when the pandemic started, for a great example, and we're all working remotely, we're doing the Zooms and the team calls. And in some ways, COVID's been a blessing for our team and some team members in particular. But I hired a Outlook specialist to teach us all these tricks, because everybody manages their own Outlooks in their own little way, right? And they have their own habits, good or bad. Everybody has their own system. So we did a Zoom call with this specialist, and then he gave us homework. We all had to watch 3 hours of videos. And I told him before we got on team, he goes, and because it's better if it came from an outside person than from me. And he goes, this is what I want to do. I want everybody to do this homework by the next time we meet. And everybody must share 3 things they started implementing new in their Outlook that you got out of these videos. So now all of a sudden everybody had homework. Now these are 3 hours of videos. All you had to do is implement 3 things. So it wasn't like they were drinking out of the fire hydrant, but they didn't have to dramatically change things. They just had to change 3 tweaks.
Right.
So he did that. And then the next time he said, that's great. You thought about this, blah, blah, blah. And then he said, okay, here are 2 more videos, and I want you to pick up 2 things. And we did this over a series of time. And now it's amazing how people are starting to implement some stuff. And then we made some stuff compulsory for the team. Okay, the team now for Outlook has to adapt this. And it's amazing now how all these changes are now habitual, and we're better.
Well, I think one of the things that you guys did well with that was you did those changes incrementally. So it was first, let's do 3, and then we'll do 2. Having been in technology my whole career and working with technology companies, but even being at companies with innovative people, when you have to adopt new technology, oftentimes a lot of those adoptions are failures. I mean, you talked about all the customer relationship management implementations. They fail because the teams do not start using the system. Salespeople don't want to input data. They want to do it the way they've always done it. But one of the challenges I've seen over the years is that they have you drinking from the fire hose, but then they want you to implement all the changes all at once, which is way too much for most people.
Mm-hmm.
You don't if you're using a marathon analogy, you don't just go run 26 miles. You start running fewer miles over and over again, and you build up. It's the same thing.
Absolutely. It has to be slow incremental changes. And then I just had a, now we have a Teams, Microsoft Teams specialist. In our industry, we have to use Teams because it's more secure than Zoom. And so now we have doing the same thing with Teams, how to implement Teams. And we're just doing baby steps, the slowly building blocks.
But that's a good point though, Craig, is that the fact that that's kind of like practice. I mean, you're practicing those changes by going through them incrementally, so that if you're not practicing and all of a sudden a big change occurs to you, that can really pose challenges for you to deal with it and overcome it, because the fact that you aren't ready for it. Again, if you guys are doing that in an incremental basis, I think that's been really helpful.
No, we have, and because we have to adapt to our clients too, right? And the business in general. So, and it has to be incremental. Some people are faster than others on change, and some people don't like it at all, right? I'm married. My wife, Anna, her, she's not a change person. Right? It took her forever for me to get her a BlackBerry. Then once I got her the BlackBerry and I went straight to the iPhone, I probably had an iPhone for 2 years before she gave up the BlackBerry. Right? And I immediately gave it, as soon as that iPhone came out, I immediately got the iPhone and the BlackBerry. So it's just different things for different people. They just get comfortable.
Right. So talk a little bit, I'm curious, because now that you've been in this business for so long, over 20 years, and you talk about your clients, and your clients have obviously, some of them are adapting to changes faster than others. How has the relationship business evolved over those 22 years when you think about technology and how you've engaged with your clients? And I know you've had some of your clients for many, many years. It's been a give and take, I'm sure, because I bet with some clients, you still have to, you have to deal with them and adapt to their, styles, and they may not be as progressive as you in terms of adapting to some of these changes. How have you found that to progress over your career?
Well, great question. My clientele is very high end, and high end clientele always expect exceptions and hyper responses. So when I started my career, I maybe talk to a client once a month, once a quarter, maybe twice a year. But now clients get information so much faster. Like, let's date this call right now. It's November 9th. What happened November 9th? The first day the markets opened with the Biden got announced as president-elect, and Pfizer came out with a vaccine. Right. When I woke up this morning, so my clients now they're getting those alerts on their phone, which 20 years ago they didn't, right? And I would never have to speak about major news events as frequently as I do now. So before I woke up this morning, my clients were early birds. I already had like 3 text messages and emails from clients go, what does this mean for this part of the portfolio? What does it mean for this investment? That they're getting information sometimes faster than I do. And so the response expectations has grown enormously over the last 20 years for clients, and how to manage that efficiently has been a big challenge in managing that.
And I noticed, I have this in my business too. I mean, we're getting information, and I'm constantly asked questions, oftentimes on the spot, and I could certainly answer a lot of those questions on the spot. But oftentimes the questions really require a little bit more thought. I'm sure the same thing with you. How do you manage? Do you have a process in place, or how do you manage kind of being able to tell a client that, hey, I hear what you're saying, but let me do some research on this and I will get back to you at such and such a time? Do you and your team kind of have that in place so that you can certainly be responsive, yet also be thoughtful with your responses?
Right. So I have a saying that I train everybody who joins my team: perceived wait is longer than actual wait. When you go to a restaurant and they tell you it's going to be 30 minutes, and after 15 minutes you go, hey, where am I on the list, right? Because they didn't keep you involved in the process. It probably felt like 45 minutes. That's your perceived wait. The actual wait was only 15. When our clients call or email, I have a thing that we must respond quickly. So I make sure people schedule like 3 or 4 times a day, depending on who you are on my team, to make sure that a response went out to every client, even if we don't have the answer. Acknowledge receipt of their inquiry, right?
Right.
Say, oh, this is going to take some time, but I'm going to get back to you Tuesday at 2. And it must be, and we must under promise and over deliver on each one of those expectations. If you say Tuesday at 2, it better be Tuesday morning or Monday night. And we have a process for getting those emails and then putting it on the calendar to making sure that we have enough time to triage everything coming our way. But
so how did your team receive that? Because you have a team, different ages, some very young people, right, other people a little bit older. how did they receive that message from you with that sort of the need to do that? Because not everybody I'm sure not everybody's as responsive as you, because, you and I are similar that way. We respond very quickly. You respond to me. I'm not your client, very quickly too.
That's right.
So that's like in our nature.
I have a zero inbox policy when I go to bed at night, and I try to get everybody on my team to do the same. Not everybody does. It needs to get filed. It needs to get responded to. Because in our business, I feel my team's very blessed. I mean, there's 10 of us now, and we manage billions of dollars. But the market does what the market does. I think we're very smart people. I think we're very good at what we do. But you know what? There's a lot of other smart people out there, and there's a lot of very good people out there. And the only thing we really truly have, I think, is our service. That if we're really smart and really good, and we have bad service, we're going to lose clients. And if somebody's only mediocre at what they do in our business and have unbelievable service, we can lose clients to them too.
Right.
Right. And high net worth people expect exceptions. They're just used to it. When they go on vacation, go to the doctors, they're just used to exceptions and having such high level service. So when I decided to build this team and this business, I said, we can not only be smart and very good at what we do, we need to be thoughtful, and we need to have such a high level of service. And our service, going back to change, because of how everything has changed over the years, is mostly what we talk about in team meetings.
So you feel like your team has really embraced kind of that philosophy? I mean, it sounds like it's a requirement, and it's the right move that it's a requirement to be part of your team. But I certainly found, throughout, I've worked with a lot of different people, that there's some really talented people that everyone's got weaknesses.
Right.
And what I found is that oftentimes, if you can make sure that you're really kind of helping to play to people's strengths, so that you're not evaluating them purely on their weaknesses, or not always constantly talking to them about how to improve these areas. How has that worked on your team? I'm sure, maybe it might be just the fact that it's a requirement that they need to have that high level of service and get on board, or they can't really be a part of it. But do you see what I'm talking about, for that strengths versus weaknesses aspect of it?
No, I do. Like, we have somebody on our team that we really minimize, and we told them that in terms of frontline contact. But he's very good at some very strong administrative operational tasks. We actually just appointed him the CTO, the Chief Technology. I never had a Chief Technology Officer on my team.
Right.
And given everything with teams and how we're now sourcing tasks and projects and everything like that, I just wanted to make sure, between mobile phones and the security on that, and iPads, and then all our work computers and communication, I just wanted to make sure that we have somebody who's always looking at technology, always learning from other teams. And so we made him the CTO.
But by the way, that's exactly what I'm talking about. First of all, that's great for a couple of reasons. One is that that's a great example of you as the team leader adapting to the change, that technology is wonderful, but it can also be complicated, challenging, and disrupt things. Meaning disrupting, if this interview gets disrupted because there's a bad connection, we need to just move forward, or we'll reconnect at some point. But that's what happens when you're doing things like that. And I've been on plenty of Teams calls, now over the past several months. And Teams is different from WebEx, and it's different from Zoom, so you got to learn the different areas. The fact that you appointed, had somebody do that, number one, is really, really good to adapting to change. The other part of it, though, is that you are playing to that person's strengths. It's it's recognizing that they can be successful on your team by playing a really important role here, versus forcing them into something that is necessarily not a good fit. And there's a difference between adapting to changes and sometimes things just aren't a good fit. And you've done both. You've adapted to change, but also made a good fit for your team by having expertise in a certain area to raise the level for your clients.
No, exactly. So this individual, he only has to worry about the team members, me and the eight of us, or nine of us. We're his clients now.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to worry about our 100 families we manage, right?
But he technology enables you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
And he's not comfortable talking, because I think to be a high service oriented salesperson, you got to know how to recognize and shift how you can communicate depending on who you're talking to at that moment.
Right.
And some people struggle with that. So, but yeah, so I think if you're not leading with technology in most any business right now, I really don't know where you're headed.
So let me shift gears for a second in terms of talking about another aspect that I think is important when kind of preparing for or just learning how to adapt to changes. And that's really around continuous learning. I'm a big fan that you can learn your way into evolving your career very successfully. How have you, I mean, obviously you've talked about some examples already, but how have you really made it a point to learn continuously through your career to make sure that you are staying relevant and you're able to resonate not only with your existing clients, but the future clients that you're going to have to continue to grow your business?
Great question, Brett. And I think it's going to be different for different types of businesses. But in our business, if you're not curious and thirsty to keep on learning, you're not going to last very long. Because I mean, we just talked about the 20 years of we've been in the workforce since we left Vanderbilt. I mean, think about how much the world has changed, and financially, right? We when we were kicking around undergraduate school, none of these companies, the top 10 market cap companies and the top 10 employers now at universities, did not exist when we were in school.
Right.
And how they're evaluated from enterprise value in terms of multiples, multiple sales, growth multiples. People that were in my business 40, 50 years ago would look at this and their eyes would pop out. This is not sustainable. And you just fast forward that now, and we're always learning new things and new opportunities. When I started in this business, you primarily were dealing with, in the high net worth space, I'll tell you even how the world's changed. I primarily dealt with white men, and we spoke about the U.S. equity markets, U.S. bonds, and some private real estate and some private equity. Now, clientele in the high net worth space is almost as diverse as America is.
Right.
So you got to communicate with those people differently, right? A lot more women are controlling wealth than they did 20 years ago. But also now we're talking about the proliferation of hedge funds. We're talking about the proliferation of all types of investments, and how the evaluation of those investments have changed. And I'm always a curious person, but in my seat, you're not going to last long in this business if and tax laws have changed. I mean, think about all the work my team did up until this past week.
Right.
If this happens, if status quo, blue wave, Trump wins, but the Republicans had the Senate, and what the tax legislation might be, what could do for the markets. I mean, we had to come up with about 4 different roadmaps to figure out what we're going to be implementing after the election. And if you're not enjoying those conversations, you're not going to last long in this business.
So did you have a system in terms of your approach to learning on an ongoing basis? Because there's so much information out there. Obviously, the kind of topics that are going to be important for your business, you really need a diverse range of topics. In fact, you need to be able to talk to your clients about a wide, area of topics. Did you curate, come up with some people that you wanted to, look at in terms of who you could talk to, whether they reading, is reading a good way that you learn? Is it from talking to people? Is it from watching certain videos? Like and that's all changed over time. Like you can learn a lot more on YouTube now. You couldn't do that 20 years ago if you want to learn how to, a new skill or something like that. So talk a little bit about how you've kind of developed that skill of constantly learning and how that's evolved maybe over time.
Yeah, well, going back 20 years ago when I left business school, I think I had 5 newspapers show up on my desk every morning, literally hard newspapers, right? And I would breeze through that in first 30 to 60 minutes of my day.
Can we guess those newspapers? I'm curious. Is that Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Investors Business Daily? What are the other 2?
The Financial Times, it was the Wall Street Journal. It was always a local newspaper in the local business communities of a few cities that I was covering on. Investment Daily, the New York Times, I would blitz through.
Okay.
So always always wanted to know what's going on locally though too.
Right.
But so think about that. Now I have not touched a physical newspaper probably 7 to 10 years.
Right.
I can't.
Me too.
And the hard, I'm turn my lights on. The hard fact is, if you get the morning Wall Street Journal, it's old news by the time you get it. I got it all right now.
Yep.
You know, and now the proliferation of Bloombergs and fact sets, and instantaneous technology, and so I got a lot of my news that way. Oh, probably early in my career, I was listening to a lot of investment calls, a lot of investment strategists at my firms, and got my news that way. You still were watching the CNBCs and what have you, but a lot of my great information actually came from my clients, because they were just very successful people and how they made money. And was there going to be any consolidation in that space, or was that sector going to explode, or what they had? So, and I still love that part. That part has probably stayed consistent. My clients are incredibly successful. Now their businesses have changed, more technology related, more biotech related, gaming related. But my best information comes from my clients. But how I get information now is, I'm not embarrassed to say I follow some great people on Twitter who follow some great sectors and some interesting AI companies. And they post articles and what have you. I mean, I know how to filter out all the noise, at least for me. And then on my iPads, I customize the news on my apps.
Right.
See where I want to pull from. But now I also can click a button on my system here that if there's something happening in the automobile industry or the airline industry today, which led to recovery. I mean, the airlines went through the roof when they heard about vaccines. I can tap on my fact set, and there's a dozen articles from all major news wires across the globe talking about it, or any particular sector and individual.
So do you think how do you prioritize? I mean, that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of information you just covered. And by the way, that's very similar, I think, to the way I learn. And I think both of us do it a lot from a reading perspective.
Right.
But how do you prioritize those topics? Is it, so for example, cryptocurrency. Okay. I was really exposed to cryptocurrency for the first time, probably at the 2013 at an event here in Atlanta. Because there's a couple companies here that are startups that are doing things with, managing the payment process through Bitcoin, for example. And that's how I got really exposed to it. But in 2013, Bitcoin was still really early. I mean, I think it was trading maybe still under $1,000 before it had its big run up, back down, et cetera. You could make the argument in different industries, when should you really start paying attention to cryptocurrency? Some could say it should have been in 2010 if you really were smart and got in early on it.
Right.
But between that and AI has been talked about my entire career, over 25 years. To me, only the past couple years has it really come to a point where I feel I should be paying attention to AI, which I am a great deal now. How do you go through the prioritization process? Because you can get overloaded with all that information to be able to take out what's the real important stuff you need to know.
That's a great question. There's an old book by Ben Graham called The Intelligent Investor. And I try to split it up between investing and speculating. So you mentioned cryptocurrency. I read about it a long time ago as well. And I always thought it's almost congruous to gold. And that's a speculative thing. It's not a business that's kicking out profits or anything like that. And it was going to be volatile. And we stayed away from it. Now, I brought that up to my team and said, this is something, my clients are already wealthy. They already hit the grand slam. Our job is to hit singles and doubles. So for us to place a binary bet on something like cryptocurrency, it was too speculative for us.
Right.
Apple Computer 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when they first came out with their first iPhone, was a $100 billion company. And that's a $2 trillion company. But I had the product in my pocket and I loved it. That's investing. We know that this is going to change the world. So that's the difference between speculating and investing. But we talk about it as a team and we just get a consensus. But also, our team is very diverse. Like, I can't stand fixed income and bonds. I can't even stand reading about it. The credit analysis with the pandemic, which municipalities are going to have tax revenue problems and could potentially have a downgrade in their bonds. I mean, to me, it's like watching paint dry. It's nothing exciting. But thankfully, my partner Kim, who's been a partner of mine for 17 years now, she handles all that. So she reads all that. Right. My partner Andy, who loves the private equity world. Right. So he meets with all the private equity managers. He's reading all the prospectuses on that. Everything's coming down the pike, and looking at their underlying portfolio companies. So that's, I think for any team, you got to have diverse interests as well.
Right, right. So one other thing I wanted to explore the topic of resilience, because I also kind of contend that being resilient is really important to adapting to changes. And especially given the fact that from a macro level, if you think about our careers, we talked about the fact that, you've touched on .coms, and .coms kind of busting, around 2001, 2002 timeframe, really started in 2000. You talk about 9/11, you talk about the financial crisis, and now the pandemic. That's a lot of things that have happened in the main part of our careers. And so there's we both have maintained, been able to survive our careers through all those macro events. I'm sure we've had plenty of micro events through our careers that we've also been able to come out the other side with, sometimes better than others. Do you have any examples where being resilient has helped you through times of challenge for you?
Absolutely. I think this past March is a great example. The market sold off 30+% in a matter of weeks. We've never seen anything like that happen that quickly, even during the financial crisis. And that took a lot of hand-holding. That took a lot of fear from our team and my clients. But I think resilience is all about relative, right? My background. I lost my dad when I was very young. I had to take care of my grandfather. So I've experienced some bad stuff in my life. And so when you go through this and you realize it's just money and we're going to get through this, times always get better. The financial crisis, we got through it, got better.
Right.
9/11, it's not the end of the world. Market sold off, but you know what? You fast forward a year, got better. .com got better. There's something called the Vix Index, which is the fear factor of the market. Anytime it hits 50, that's when people are panicking. It got as high as 81 in the financial crisis. This past March, I got up to 85, an all-time high. By the way, a Vanderbilt professor created the Vix Index.
Oh, I did not know that.
A guy named Bob Whaley. But he started in the 90s. But my point is, that's when people are scared and running. And history tells us anytime the VIX gets above 50, the average 12-month return of the S&P 500 Dow Jones is 30+%. So my job as an educator for my clients is saying, okay, when March hit, let's rewind to 2008. We had the same fear, but we held on. And let me tell you where we were by 2010. 9/11, I have some clients who were with me from 9/11. When that hit, the market sold off this, but let me tell you where we're told. So that's resilience, is comparing it to where we've already been through. Now, unfortunately, he said, you read history books, they call all these 100-year floods, but I tell everybody that's impossible because I've been in this career 20 years and I've already had 4 100-year floods in my career. And something else is going to happen in the decade from now. I don't know what it's going to be, but something always happens.
Right. Right.
So.
No, I think you bring up some really good points. I think that I think there's opportunities to, I think you've done a good job of being able to recall those challenging times and have the confidence to know that things will turn the corner and they will get better. What is that, again, let me ask this, is that something you think you were just kind of born with? I mean, how do you have that perspective? Because that's not the easiest. I mean, that's easy for us to kind of talk about right now. We know how all those things kind of turned out and did get better after those things. I recall actually there was an analyst for a firm that ultimately got bought by Gartner called AMR Research. And he was a great guy. He wrote these great columns, but he did have one prediction after 9/11. He pretty much predicted that business travel was going to zero, which was, less than 2 months later, that was already wrong. But he had that negative view right after that event. And a lot of people are like that, and I think that how do you learn the fact that this is the way you are, Craig? I mean, because you really have that healthy optimism, very realistic, but optimistic attitude that things are going to get better from these challenging times.
Because the fact of the matter, they're really not that bad. We're still living in America. We're still living well. And again, relatively, people always ask me, what's the worst recession you ever been in? Well, it's the one I'm currently in, because that's the one I'm feeling right now. But if you take a deep breath and you just look back at those past scabs, you realize They're just as bad and we got through it. And you just got to put one foot in front of the other. And, sometimes winning the day just means getting to tomorrow. And you just got to fight for tomorrow. And that's when you're going to, and one day soon, you're going to start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. I can't tell you it's going to be tomorrow, but you just got to fight for tomorrow. The other thing too in my business is people need to understand, which I teach people, is everything's relative. Wealth is relative. If the US government put $1 million in everybody's mailbox tomorrow, no one's going to be better off in society than they are today. Because it would be inflation. All prices would go up and your $1 million would have no effect. If I hope I'm making sense there.
No,
right?
that makes perfect sense. Right.
So I tell it to my clients, if the markets fell 35% and your $20 million portfolio went down to 14 or 15, you're really not any worse off in society than you were the day before.
Right.
Right. It feels horrible. I get it. Right. And you're going to button down the hatches because you just feel like you lost a third of your wealth overnight. And you're going to spend less, which is actually a positive now. But you fast forward, you're going to get it all back. So look at March and look where we are today at all-time highs. Right. I mean, it came back really quickly, a V-shaped recovery. So that's my job as an educator, saying this is not the time to panic. And I also tell people, I forgot which book I got this out of, one of the books I read, and I always read these business. I'm always reading two books. One's a history book and one's like a business book. And I'll never forget this was, the emotional brain is never right, the intellectual brain. So when people call me, they're always emotional. I try to be the intellectual brain. And I tell them, the emotional brain always makes the wrong decision. People in March who sold, never got it back. That's when you need to be buying. That's when you should be buying. Oh, how can we take advantage of this? What strategic move should we take? It's not to run for the hills, even though that's what you feel like you should be doing, because that's what your emotional brain is telling you should be doing. So even in life, though, I tell it to my friends, my family, listen, you and I hiked the Grand Canyon together, we had people struggling. Do not let the emotional brain take over, because as soon as you do, you're going to lose.
No, and actually, I appreciate you bringing up even that Grand Canyon trip. And I think it's the same thing in terms of like doing something, in terms of getting out of your comfort zone and doing something uncomfortable, like running a marathon or doing a half Ironman like you did, right, or something like that. I can recall those mental moments when there were challenges during those things. I mean, it was challenging, going rim to rim in the Grand Canyon in one day, especially walking up the last 7 miles uphill. I knew I was going to finish, but I'm not going to say that there's nothing challenging about that. It was really challenging. I can remember moments in marathons I've done, in training that I've done, where I have felt awful. Okay, but then kept going, recovered, and pushed through. And I can recall those moments. So in other times when it's more mental issues of going, how I'm getting through this challenge at work, or how I'm dealing with this with my kids or something like that, I know I'll get through that. And is that something that you consistently kind of are, kind of coaching your team on? Not necessarily the sports analogy part of it, but just knowing that you can recall those challenging times and know that you got through it, knowing that you'll get through it again. And that's how you kind of summon the courage to keep moving forward.
Well, yeah, I think all this stuff is like a muscle. I think willpower is a muscle. It needs to be exercised.
Yeah.
Right. It just needs to be exercised. If you're trying to diet or you're trying to train for a race or whatever, it takes willpower, it takes commitment. You just can't, go decide I'm going to run a marathon in a month. Right.
Right.
You got to slowly build up that willpower. And then you also have to, be accountable to yourself. My thing that I do, and I firmly believe this, and I tell people on my team, and they have to do it to me once a year though, is what do you want to change personally and professionally? And they got to write it down. And if you write it down, you're 90% more likely to do it. If you write it down and you tell somebody, you're even more likely to do it, right? So it's kind of like the Grand Canyon trip. Hey, Brett, you want to go on this Grand Canyon trip with me? We're going to do Rim to Rim in a day. Oh, yeah, sure. Well, now we're going to do it. If I just said, hey, I'm going to try to do this for my birthday or by the time I turn X event, and it's just me, it's too easy for me to hit the eject button.
Right.
Right. So
no, that's exactly right. That's, by the way, my first marathon, I left a voicemail for a friend of mine telling him I was going to do it later that year. And it was in the voicemail. I knew I was accountable at that point because I had said I was going to do it to him and he was going to make me accountable.
No, absolutely. So it goes back to like the Outlook professional I had about how to be more efficient with Outlook in this Teams, this leader said, okay, in 2 weeks, this is your homework, and everybody needs to talk about the 3 things they changed. Now they're accountable. They have to implement 3 things.
Right.
Right. And I think it's a big part of it. And teaching people that, and I tell people, this is not personal. This is trying to get everybody's mind open.
Absolutely. Well, Craig, this has been great. I want to mention 2 takeaways before we adjourn here. The 2 things that really hit home for me that really helped you and your team adapt to changes is, one, just being open-minded and having a healthy curiosity.
Right.
And then the second part was really putting in place a system where you're continuously learning, so that you're continuously understanding where things are going, having the knowledge to be able to talk to different people, to know that you can get through some of the changes that are occurring. So I really appreciate you taking the time today, Craig.
Not a problem. I enjoyed it.
All right. Well, thanks.
Let me know.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Craig, for joining us on Adapt2Changes. We really enjoyed this interview today, and look forward to talking with you in the future. Thanks.
Take care. Thanks.
You too. Bye.